A Washington Examiner op-ed puts it bluntly with this headline: yes, Hillary Clinton spied on Donald Trump while he was president. Pete Hegseth is co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend. Pete, I said justifiably furious the former president is. I mean, he's expressing it. Where would you put where we should be, though, on all of this flood of information about Hillary Clinton? What are we learning?
What we're learning is what Donald Trump said happened to him is that, call it wiretapping of Trump Tower, call it espionage, call it spying, call it stealing, call it snooping, call it what you want. The Hillary Clinton campaign, through a Democrat law firm, worked with tech executives and a major U.S. research university we now know. The tech executive, the New York Post has reported his name, Rodney Joffe. We know who that is. They worked together to not just obtain access to servers, but they controlled servers that were used by the office of the president, the executive office of the president. So this is not just during the campaign. This was during the transition and during President-elect Trump's time and when he was in the White House. And it continued into 2027. What do you call it when an opposing political party, through third parties, through tech executives, gain access to the server of the President of the United States and then look for data connections? And it wasn't for evidence of a crime. That's not what John Durham is saying here. That's not what he's saying they were looking for. They were looking for, quote, a narrative, quote, an inference of a connection between Donald Trump and the Russians because they wanted distraction away from Hillary Clinton's connections and Hillary Clinton's emails that had been released. They needed a new narrative, and they found their men in Sussman, which Durham has indicted, and others who may soon to be indicted. So, you look at an email that was sent. This is part of Sussman's indictment. An email that was sent by Joffe, who's the tech executive. Joffe said, I was tentatively offered the top cybersecurity job by the Democrats when it looked like they'd win. He said, I definitely would not take the job under Trump. They used this tech exec to get access to data so they could trash a president. That's espionage. And as Trump said, this is worse than Watergate. I agree. I
look at the bigger picture, too. I mean, that picture is huge, and it's got artwork on the wall. It's so big. But I look at, everything leaves a trail. And you don't know these third parties the way that you know each other. So what happens if an enemy decides that it wants to cozy up? What happens if the trail that's left behind with all of the digging and the attempts to infiltrate somehow digs up something that gets in the wrong hands? I mean, that's another whole, and I'd want to talk with a tech exec about that, who had his or her hands in this, because that's a whole nother level of accountability that I'm certain that they'll look at. But meanwhile, Pete, you and I always talk about how tweets never die. You can always find them. So that's what happened in this investigation. And so the unearthed Hillary Clinton tweets from the days before the 2016 presidential election show the candidate pushing the now bunked information, that narrative you were talking about, that Donald Trump was using a covert server linking him to Russia. One reads this way. Now remember, Hillary Clinton, Twitter account. Computer scientists have apparently uncovered a covert server linking the Trump organization to a Russian-based bank. Here's another. It's time for Trump to answer serious questions about his ties to Russia. In a tweet, your thoughts.
How did she know this?
Excellent question.
How did she purport to know this? This is right on the eve of the election. You know who sent similar tweets and statements about that? Jake Sullivan. Jake Sullivan is the current national security advisor attempting to quell our concerns about a Russian invasion of Ukraine. So you've got current actors and former actors who had access to information, and that's why what Durham is doing is so important. Remember the Mueller report? It was leak after leak after leak. It was bombshell, 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 and then ultimately a series of hearings and a report that did not lead to an impeachment because it was all based on a house of cards. But it was all a media exercise, and they fed to the FBI, and the FBI looked into things, and then they reported that the FBI was looking into it, and that's how they fed a narrative because it was was about a narrative.
Yeah.
John Durham dropped this report on a Friday. It was a simple court filing, knowing that if you have the truth and you have actual evidence, that's a headline in and of itself. Here's the sad part, Harris. I did a quick check yet again of ABC News, CNN, MSNBC, right before we came on the air.
I think I know what you're going to say.
Not a mention, because they've already done their job as it purports to the issue of Trump and Russia. They deceive their viewers and feel no accountability and responsibility to retract or correct.
Russia is right back in the headlines with the president of the United States, only this one is Biden. And you mentioned the White House National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. Well, he will brief congressional leaders later today on the Russia-Ukraine crisis. The administration's warnings about a possible invasion are getting more dire. I don't even see how they could. I mean, he surrounded the country on 3 sides to invade it. Russia has. Let's watch.
A major military action could begin by Russia in Ukraine any day now. That includes this coming week before the end of the Olympics.
We have good sources of intelligence, and they're telling us that, that things are sort of building now to some sort of crescendo opportunity for Mr. Putin.
President Biden has promised to take swift and decisive action if a single Russian troop crosses the border. An hour-long phone call between the two leaders didn't seem to change anything. Of course not. Putin is showing no signs of backing down. He doesn't care. Republicans say the president is looking weak on the world stage.
5 minutes is a time to make it clear to Putin that we stand resolute behind the Ukrainian people. The only clarity we've had in this whole thing is that American citizens are on their own in a potential war zone. Other than that, there's not much clarity, and Putin he's making his decision based on our inaction rather than his decision based on our threat of real action.
I wonder if the media on the left are going to scream, Russia, 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 like they were when investigators were going down that debunked narrative about Trump and Russia. I wonder if they're going to scream that and say, no, 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 there's nothing to see here, because there is a lot to see here. And so the question is...
There's a lot to see here.
Yeah. The question to me, Pete, one of them would be, Putin doesn't take this president seriously because he's had over 100,000 troops on the border ready to invade Ukraine for quite some time now. He's been perched, and all we could do through our president was say, well, you know, if a minor incursion happens, it's okay. I mean, I'm quoting him. The quotes sound bad. You don't even need to paraphrase anything.
No, you don't. And it's not just the weakness that he feels from this current administration. It's the experience he had from the Obama-Biden administration with what happened in Crimea. It's the experience that he had of an authorization of a pipeline, no sanctions against a forthcoming pipeline, while he watched this administration cripple our own domestic energy production. It's the experience of him watching our debacle, our disgrace in Afghanistan, our total incapability there that led Vladimir Putin to say, this is perfect. Peak freeze. I want to reestablish a portion of the Soviet Union. I want more of my energy dominance. I want more of my resources. I believe in borders and invading them if I need to. And as a result, I'm going to move. And he believes Joe Biden will do nothing. He believes NATO is impotent. And I think this is something to look out for, Harris. A two-front war. Okay? The Chinese are watching this too. Why wouldn't they move on Taiwan on a similar timeline eventually or close thereafter, knowing that we couldn't deal with one front, let alone two?
Well, look, North Korea always likes a little attention, but they sure have been putting some missiles in the air, and who knows, maybe they'll be a distraction as well. I wanted to leave just 10 seconds for this. This part of the story is so important. Those 3,000 troops standing by in Poland as our people try to get out of Ukraine now and can take refuge there. Tell me about them. Their families are watching them insert themselves. I just want to know, when Biden says he's not really putting us on the ground in Ukraine, do you believe it? Like, what's the reality?
I believe it right now.
Okay.
I think it is a sense of showing strength for NATO. What I'm more concerned about is that Poland, through the U.S. Embassy, is requiring U.S. citizens to show proof of vaccination so they can go into Poland.
Wanted to get to that.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. You can cross the southern border in our country without proof of anything. But if you want to leave a war zone as American and go to an ally in Poland, our embassy is requiring not just you show identification, but you show a vax card. And if possible, a negative test. So flee Putin's army with your vaccination in tow.
Does this president have as much care, concern for Americans who are stuck in places like Afghanistan and Ukraine trying to get out, as he does about those coming across a border that needs to be secure
Exactly
for our own sovereignty and where it's still in a pandemic. I mean, I think that's a fair question for this president. We'll see if we ever get an answer on that one. I can't be the only reporter who wants to ask it. Pete Hegseth, thank you very much for being in focus, getting us started today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.